Hey everyone, I'm Adam Orth. Welcome to a special edition of the Game Maker's Notebook from Reykjavik, Iceland. Today I'm speaking with Kristian Segerstrale, CEO of Super Evil Megacorp. In this episode, we discuss his journey into the industry through early mobile games and being on the cusp of emerging platforms, joining and becoming CEO of Super Evil Megacorp, the company's unique remote-first practices and methodologies, and his passion and efforts around climate change and how the game industry can come together to be a positive force for change. Hope you enjoy. Hey Kristian, welcome to the Game Maker's Notebook, coming from Reykjavik, Iceland.
Thank you. Delighted to be here.
How are you doing today?
Good, thank you. Good.
I'm really excited to talk to you today. We've got a bunch of stuff to go through, but I wanted to give our listeners an opportunity to understand a little bit about your history through games, how you started. You know, I've got all the notes of what you've done, and obviously I'm familiar with what you've done, but maybe for our listeners, you could go through a little bit of your journey in games and to where you are now.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite a journey. I think I just looked at it. This is my 23rd year of building game companies, which is a long time, right?
I'm pretty close to that too.
Yeah,
it
is
22 or 23.
But I guess, I mean, just to take it back a little further, I grew up playing games in the sort of Commodore 64 era. I grew up learning to make games. I really enjoyed learning programming early on. I was going to study computer science, and I didn't even really know if there was such a thing as a game industry, but certainly computers was like a big thing for me growing up. I then got sidetracked. I actually ended up discovering economics as a subject, and I thought, hey, here's like a programming language for society. Like if you could just program the interest rates and the tax rates and these sorts of things correctly and have a good set of laws and figure all this out, you could create an operating system for the economy where everybody's happy. It just leads to good outcomes, like game balancing sort of. So I ended up kind of enamored with that idea and ended up doing my undergrad in economics and a postgrad in economics. And only after that did it actually dawn on me that this mental model is entirely wrong. Economics is not a programming language for society. It's at best a half-functioning tools that sometimes work to deliver outcomes. But so after that, I ran home to mommy and my first love of tech and ended up in a tech startup in London. This is in year 2000.
Macrospace?
Yeah, this is Macro. Actually, not Macrospace. There was actually, before that, a company called Digital Mobility, which made browsers, the very first browsers for mobile phones. And this notion that, hey, you could access the internet on your mobile phone. I mean, that's pretty crazy. And also worked in some of the very, very foundational technologies to do with being able to download something from the internet onto the phone and run it with using Java 2 micro edition, as was the virtual machine at the time. And that startup was quite a revelation in lots of ways for me. I was brought in as the head of product management. Like that was my offer letter. That was going to be the head of product management. I literally had no idea what product management was. And I think there's a little, the young, arrogant me went, well, I can clearly figure this out. They think I'm good enough, so I can do this. Whereas I think it should probably be a bit of a warning sign, to people that if a company hires you to do a job that you truly don't know how to do and they are enthusiastic about it, you should probably ask more questions about the company.
Yeah.
At that point.
I've been there a couple of times.
Yeah. I had a wonderful time there for about a year, really having a headache every day, just absorbing technologies and absorbing how, sort of getting a really ground level view of how mobile technology is likely to evolve. And as a result, even though that startup ended up in trouble, I very quickly left together with the person who had headed the application development team and, a senior engineer to go, hey, how about we kind of set up our own company and just try to do this stuff, but kind of do it well.
Right.
Actually, kind of promise a thing and then deliver on that thing and kind of stay focused and try to do that. And as a result, we started off by writing delivery software for mobile applications. So this idea of, hey, if you're a network operator and you want to run your own, which is now called app stores, but back then portals to download games, then how would you do that? And we can say, hey, you know what? We can do that for you. We can kind of manage this download portal for you. And then quickly we realized, hey, there's actually really no applications around because nobody's made any yet. So why don't we make some quote unquote first party applications and games? And we're like, well, we all grew up making games, so plus the computing capabilities of these devices with their 64 kilobytes of memory, and tiny 65 by say, 48 pixel black or white pixel kind of screens, teeny tiny screens.
Tiny.
But actually computing capabilities were not that dissimilar from the computers that I made games on, right? When I grew up, the Commodore 64, right? Comes from 64 kilobytes.
Gaming was still an undercurrent of all this for you when you're developing the browser based.
No, we were literally not making games. We were making delivery softwares. Yeah, yes, I played lots of games. Yep. I had left my game making days behind, so I thought, right? Until, hey, we need to make some games to like fill the pipeline. Like I'm sure the professional game companies who know how to do this will come in one day and, outcompete us entirely. But for now, let's make some first party games so that these download portals would have some content. So we just looked at what games did we like in the 1980s and how can we create games inspired by those games? And back then we literally had a 4 or 5 week complete game development cycle from a hey, what shall we make to finished product? Because it only takes so long to make a Pac-Man like game or to make a Turtle Bridge like game or any other game that you sort of loved from that era. So we made a lot of games quite quickly. And as we discovered over time, we are actually turned out to be better at making games than we turned out to be making these game delivery systems. Over time, our game business very quickly, other game delivery systems wanted our games because we spent a lot of love on making them. And that's how Macrospace, my first company, really started growing. And that business grew quite quickly. Like we found ourselves being a game company, which we didn't set up originally. But one of the really great things was that we released a lot of titles. I want to say like over our first, we had a sort of at least, I would say, we probably released about 10 titles a year, more or less, that were all, some more successful than others. We didn't really kill titles at the time because we could make them so fast, and then it was done. If it wasn't successful, and that was okay. But we learned so much about the cycle of game making. And then, of course, new phones would come out every year, and they would have slightly larger screens, slightly more memory, slightly more capability. So you very quickly ended up with a porting nightmare of, you had to support like hundreds and hundreds of different types of SKUs, and then you had to start thinking about the technology underlying, like what is our game engine? Like how do we build a thing that then we can ultimately that can manifest itself on different size screens in different ways.
And what's the best one to focus on? And, that whole time was bananas.
It was absolutely bonkers that time, yeah. So, but what was cool is that we learned quickly as a team to try to look forward on technology, like where are mobile phones going? What's the screen size is going to be 2 years from now? And how do we learn to make games that we can ultimately sort of up port to those devices, and or like how do we create a game that really makes the most out of these devices and the new whatever crazy control system they would come out with. Because of course these were not touchscreens, so you had phones with various form factors and whatnot. So it was like in lots of ways I felt like that business, it was so hard to eke a profit out of it, and there was such hard work to do everything. It was like the Russian gulag stage of mobile gaming. You worked so hard, but the people who survived it, who actually managed to figure out systems and processes to make games and get them to run technically and run QA on like hundreds of different devices that you had to somehow get hold of, and somehow successfully sell these through and ultimately make enough money to pay yourselves, I think became very adept at being incredibly flexible and thoughtful in terms of game company building. Because whatever you built got torn down very quickly because it was a new phone or a new approach or a new thing that was happening in the market.
Interesting. So what were your kind of techniques? I'm just super curious about the future predicting for 2 years down the road when the new phone was coming out. Like, how did you guys approach that when you were thinking future forward for your games?
So it became very quickly. So one of the fun things was because the technology cycle was so fast. Like literally that was a time when, like these days, a new phone comes out and how is this different from the previous one? Like maybe a slightly better camera or whatnot. But back then they actually did become remarkably better like year by year by year,
Yep.
right? And you could actually literally just look back 2 years and you could sort of see what is the curve, and then you could think, okay, what does that mean in a year or 2 years time? And then you could always look at Korea and Japan, right? Because they were always ahead at that time, so you could sort of see, okay, so that's where it's going to be heading in that broad direction. Maybe not exactly like that, but that was always an important inspiration. But then trying to also forecast the technologies and like how is Java going to evolve on mobile, how it'll business models evolve, because they were folks, of course, trying out subscription services and all sorts of things, and that we became obsessed with trying to understand this notion of like, how will people play on these devices a couple of years from now? How can we make sure that we will be making great games, but be ready for that? And I think actually those years, if you look at companies like, say, Supercell was founded by a set of folks who previously built a company called Sumea out of Finland that struggled with exactly the same things. We knew like we were sort of almost sister companies in that we both, whenever there would be a new phone, we'd have our games on it, they'd have their games on it, and we were friendly rivals in game making that way. But both of us sort of learned similar things and hence became obsessed with trying to work out what's happening with game platforms in general. And I think many of those teams went on to then build, whether it was Facebook game companies or first generation like iPhone game companies or whatnot, like game companies in areas where the platform is changing rapidly. Yep. That then impacts game design, impacts technical approach, all of those things. And they become very kind of agile game making teams with a very keen eye on technology roadmaps as a result.
Yeah, I mean, that time I remember being in very firmly in the console game world and watching that and just being like, oh my God, how do they do that? Because of the rapid technology change, a new phone is a new platform. So it was really interesting to watch that.
Yeah. One thing actually that was pretty interesting is that the companies that were successful in that era typically had a pretty different game making structure from console companies. Like the joke at the time ran that whenever a bigger game company attempted to make a mobile game, they would take far too long and put far too many people, and it would never work out. Basically, it would come out like a year too late and then on all the wrong platforms and whatnot. And I think, and the sort of organizationally, our observation was that the companies that were successful like never had the role of a producer. Like it just did not exist. So what you would have is you have like a coder artist pair that on the one hand like make the game, because that's how small the team could be. They make the core of the game, and sure, if the coder needs an assistant coder to help make more code, then so be it. Or if the artist needs an additional artist to do stuff, and then they would between themselves figure out how to get the sounds or whatever. Because it was either MIDI or some very 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 rudimentary like you can play a single wave file or whatever. That's that sort of thing. But you could basically make the game in a very small team, and the only thing that was like the thing that was most important was the sort of production management from the point of view of, are we writing this in such a way that we can port it to lots of different devices and we can QA it? So like, what does the QA pipeline look like internally? But nobody mess with like, I don't think I ever saw a game design doc, any kind of like, anything that would constitute gates in development or anything like this. It was literally just we're gonna make
fast.
it fast. Yeah, it's too like all of that was overhead, which actually interestingly also bled over, I think, to two companies like Supercell and many of that generation of mobile gaming companies were like, hey, we make games in small teams with minimal overhead, which really works very well at a certain scale of game. Yeah, and if you can make that culture work, then of course. But there is also a very long and proud history of making larger budget games where you truly perhaps need to have a pretty different approach to making games. And I think that transition is actually really interesting.
On those big games, I mean, as soon as you get over 10 people, you basically need a producer.
Yeah. And there are really good reasons for gates in, development processes. And there's really good reasons for game design docs and technical design docs and all of these things, right? So, but it's just interesting that raw game making, literally the coder artist, like atomic unit of game making was so effective at a time where technology moved so fast and the games were so small that you just got to ship a lot and see a lot of successes and a lot of failures and a lot of things fall apart in different ways, which is always a kind of, I felt like not ever then having worked in a big game company, the intuitive learning of how game development works and what tends to go into successful game teams, like successful projects and not successful projects, to some degree just came from pattern recognition of seeing just so many of them in different ways.
Yeah, I can imagine like you don't have time to ruminate on a failure or even a success, right? It's like more needs to happen, and you learn from doing, and it's like a certain amount of you cut out all the navel gazing of why that game didn't work, and because you're already
basically, and it just becomes more of an observation that didn't work, and then we didn't have formal postmortem processes, obviously, at the time, but it became very much of this combination of factors doesn't appear to be that successful. But it was still pretty cool. Like I remember a moment, I think it was 2003, we made a game called Ancient Empires 2, which was, we had made an Ancient Empires 1 at one point in time, which is basically a Advanced Wars inspired sort of turn-based combat game. Then we made Ancient Empires because we really liked that, and we felt like, it was good. And then we made Ancient Empires 2 because there were the color phones coming out for the first time, color screens. I mean, that's pretty awesome, right?
That's
VGA graphics, 640 by 480. We're like, we're going to go big. We're going to go big and go, color screens, make Ancient Empires 2. And we got like our best team. And this was like the biggest team production ever. There was like 5 people on this team or whatever. And I remember like I was, we were like, we're going to do this well. I'm going to, I did some of the writing for the dialogue, and, I wrote the music behind the scenes, like, as an amateur MIDI composer kind of, I'm just going to do something, right? We all pulled together on that one. That actually won the AIAS Game of the Year award for mobile at the time. And we were like, what's AIAS? What is this? Is it like they give awards for this sort of thing? Right. That's cool, So
and here we are.
Here we are. Yeah. Exactly. No, so it was, but that was, that was, I think, my first actual run-in with a quote-unquote real game industry at the time, that, hey, hold on a second, somebody cares about what we make.
And so that must have led to Glo.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. So we had, at the time, that company, Macrospace, grew very quickly for like literally not at all by any kind of crazy sort of strategy. We were a bunch of kids making games, but it just turned out that we could make them faster and better than most others. And we were good at making friends in the industry that would distribute them in different ways. And we grew revenue and profit actually fairly rapidly. Our challenge was that we then looked across the pond. This was all based out of the UK at the time. We looked at the US, and there were a bunch of game companies raising large rounds of money. We were like, what does it mean to raise money? What is this? How do we get many millions? And so we thought, okay, we need to raise some money too. Obviously not understanding anything about what it meant to raise money or any of these things. But we tried out of London, and it was very clear that we couldn't we wouldn't command valuations that would even there would be a haircut to our revenue. So if we made like $10 million and with some profit a year, then like they would offer us a term sheet at like 5 million valuation or something like this. And you're like, I'm pretty sure that this is not how this should work, when equivalent companies in the US had could raise like a $10 million round or whatever it was, or $15 million round, which seemed astronomical amounts of money at that time. So anyway, we went to the Silicon Valley and we're like, okay, we're going to raise money from the Silicon Valley. Let's go. They seem to have a lot of money over here. So can we have some, please? And they said, can you move the whole company to Silicon Valley? And we look at each other and we go, I don't think we can move the whole company. We're like 30 or 40 or whatever we were at the time. And then they ask, well, actually, can we have an idea. We just invested in a company called Sorrent. We brought in a new CEO. They have a lot of money. They don't have any of many of the things that you have. Game making capability and international distribution and all of these sorts of things. Like, would you consider somehow merging with them? And we're like, what does it mean to merge? You literally had no idea at the time. It was quite cute. But anyway, we ended up chatting a whole bunch, and then ultimately chose to combine forces with Sorrent back then. And they hated our name. They thought we sounded like a tech company, which in all fairness, we were from the start. We thought they sounded like a toothpaste. And we decided then to rebrand the global company Glo Mobile at the time. And then we literally started this path of fairly rapid growth. We had a really good, fortunate combination of really strong, like what Sorrent and / Glo US was really strong at was distribution and really great carrier relationships and some good licensing deals and whatnot. And we had pretty strong relationships across Europe and Asia. And we managed to collectively build what turned out to be a fairly successful company.
Yeah, legendary mobile company. So then you're on to Playfish.
That's it, yeah. So we went public with Glo in 2007, right? And this going public thing had, this young impressionable me was looking at those good looking bankers in this, swanky suits going like explaining to us how amazing it's all going to be. And it turned out that I thought it was like, this is going to be amazing. We're going to be a public company. Like I can tell my mom about this, right? And as it turns out, just being public, I actually really did not like it. I just kind of hated it because you had like a high score permanently in that form of your stock price. But perhaps more importantly, I had this deep unease around how the industry had evolved because we had become hyper sensitized to this idea of where's it going. And it seemed like there was no, like, while devices were getting better, the distribution layer was getting kind of more and more neglected in some ways. The carriers or network operators like Verizon's of this world that were selling these games, the role of the person running that portal, they were like a kingmaker. And there was no real, they literally decided what they were going to feature and what they weren't going to feature. And the successful companies success didn't come from making great games necessarily. Success came from figuring out a way to get your thing featured. Because at the end of the day, the carriers didn't really care about the revenue that much. And consumers had no way of complaining or knowing or writing reviews or anything. So there was no feedback loop at all. So it all became very distribution focused. And as a result, Glo Mobile's plan at the time became very, we own distribution. So we're going to go acquire a whole bunch of studios and shove product through the pipe, right? And I'm like, I want to make great games. I don't want to shove product through a pipe. And it just felt like any industry where the end result is not great for the consumer doesn't feel like necessarily that's sustainable or good, or for that matter, fun to work in. So I started feeling increasingly like, hey, we got to like pivot to do something online or do something different that's direct to consumer, like find something else, because this feels like this is kind of a dangerous path that the industry is going down, all pre-iPhone, obviously.
Yeah.
And so ultimately we decided that if I'm going to go do that, then I need to go do that outside of the company. So when we made the press release that summer, I'm going to say after about being public for just shy of 6 months or something like that, we made a press release that I'm leaving because I was a Section 16 officer at the time and the stock price jumped. And it was like, what? Wait, what? I'm worth negative how much to this company? It was just one of those moments. I'm sure it's algorithmic or whatever, but it was just one of those, like, when you truly, like, how you harbor these illusions about yourself when you grow and build companies and whatnot. And then, you're like, how's the world going to react when I leave this? I mean, I've been here for a long time making games, and then it turns out the world really doesn't care, right? So anyway, I left, as did this basically the same co-founding team from the original Makerspace. And we literally got together and said, okay, that was act one. We learned a lot. How do we take all the stuff that we know and point it to something more interesting and where we feel like there's a growth opportunity and there's something new? And we loved the Nintendo Wii collectively. Like, we used to play the Nintendo Wii games a lot together. And the thing that we really loved was the fact that it wasn't about the graphics or like what was on screen. It was really about the interaction and the social nature
in the
of
room.
Play. Like, that it was, even the ads, they always turn the camera around and show the family playing together, whatever it was, which really loved that. And then the other thing that had happened, like really that year, 2007, was that we, at least, so in the UK where we had our offices, we got access to Facebook, right? Like the very naive, very first versions of Facebook. And we created groups they didn't have groups, so I'd like message each other in the office on Facebook and whatnot. We just felt it was really fun posting photos or whatever it was. And we literally, after leaving, we were like, what if the Nintendo had a love child with Facebook? Like, what would that look like? Like, what would it be like to be able to play these types of games, which are fundamentally about this interaction together, but as opposed to playing them in a living room, playing them like in a really seamless, fast, clean platform like what Facebook was at the time. And we were like, okay, well, we can write that. We can do that. Sounds like a really fun thing. Plus, we did okay from the IPO. So we're like, we're just going to start building this, right? And we stood up really quickly our first game. Facebook hadn't launched their platform. So we started off by writing a back end as well as the front end, because we were like, we need to write game book or something like this, like the actual destination that allows you to both be friends and play these games. And so we started writing the back end and the front end, and then Facebook announced that they're doing a platform, and we're like, well, that's
we're ready.
Good. Yeah, we're ready. And then really quickly, I want to say about 2 months after founding the company, we released our first title called Who Has the Biggest Brain. This was the first time, actually, this was like the biggest production. That's not quite true. It was probably on par with the biggest production we had ever done in terms of development time. So it was probably like 2.5 months or something like this. And we actually did have weekly meetings on how it's going. And we had like all of 6 or something like people working on it, something like, 3 developers and 2 artists and 1 designer, something like this. Who Has the Biggest Brain was our first title, and it was heavily inspired by Big Brain Academy at the time, which is a big hit on the on the Game Boy Advance, I think, at the time. That game, it was one of the more magical moments actually for me, like in my entire career, was putting that game out there. I was playing it in the office and then going, okay, this works. And then kind of flick the switch that it is now live on Facebook. And let's go invite some of our friends to play this. And then just kind of see what happens, And the cool thing was like watching the very rudimentary analytics. Like there was no such thing as game analytics. Like the whole thing didn't exist, right? So this is like 2007. So we just had created this little script that would tell us like every day and more or less like how many people played, how many times it was played and whatnot. And seeing that, like, we invited like a few friends each or whatever it was. And sort of the first day was like 60 people that played the game. And we're like, that's pretty cool. I mean, we only invited 10 or whatever it was. And then the following day was like 547. We're like, who are these people? Like, how did they, what is this thing? And then it's like 4,961 the following day. And we're like, what is going on here? Like, this doesn't make any sense. And then it's like 14,000 and it's like 50,000 or whatever. And like that explosion, I remember this was just on the run up to Christmas that year. And we were all collective looking at guys like, okay, everybody pause for a second. Like, what is actually happening here? Like, we just put a game out and the growth rate was like insane. I think we hit 100,000 players in, I want to say something like 8 or 9 days or something like this. And then it continued very rapid growth from there onwards. And it caught the attention of Facebook and others pretty quickly. And then we're like, okay, so there's this is a thing. Like, you can make games like this and they will grow very fast and people will love playing them together. And back then Facebook was fairly spammy, so that when you would beat somebody else's score, it would announce to all your friends that you're smarter than that person and whatnot.
Wars.
Yeah. That hadn't been invented yet, right?
Yeah, but that was the peak.
Yeah, in some ways. In fact, it was just interesting. Like, so we went with this, okay, we want to build Nintendo Online, basically. And as we made Who Has the Biggest Brain, that was like our concept, our first, like, hey, we're going to make one game to see how this even goes. Like, how does it feel? And that was like way surpassed all of our expectations in terms of how big it can become. So we then started thinking, okay, we want to make one more game a little bit like that. So a game, because Who Has the Biggest Brain, the premise of it was like a game show online with your real, your friends' faces. So it is like very Nintendo-esque in its production values on the one hand, but on the other hand, bringing your face, your profile picture, if you like, into it in such a way that it's like a game show hosted on Facebook between your friends, and you're sort of constantly part of this game show as to who's going to have the biggest brain. So we did a quick sequel, sort of, which was called Word Challenge. That was same with a similar sort of format of a game show, but this time a word, guess the word type game. And then we're like, okay, this is cool, because we're getting like millions of players. Now we need some level of persistence. We need something that actually is something a little bit deeper. And the team started work on initially a game called Pet Society, which really became our really big hit. So that was a virtual pet game where the idea was that you would create a house, if you like, where your pet lives. Your pet is autonomous, but you have to kind of take care of it, and you can buy things for it, and you can go visit your other pets' houses and form friendships and relationships and leave them kisses and whatnot, right? And this, like, when we put that out there, like, that was the moment when we just realized, like, this is a really big business. Like, this is, like, I remember when Pet Society hit, like, not long after launch, I'm going to say like less than 2 weeks after launch, where we hit 1 million players. And then like the monthly actives growing from there, like just month on month, by call it 1 million a month or so. And just the amount of players and the amount of transactions. This is around the time when we introduced microtransactions as well. It was just one of those, very seldom in the game industry, certainly I haven't seen, and I haven't been part of a game or a story that just kind of explodes up and to the right. Like whatever we did, whatever we touched, whatever we put out there would get somewhere in the top 5 on Facebook's most played. And we would just gain players kind of for free. We didn't know what marketing was, right? We had never done it. We didn't understand. We didn't know there was such a thing as user acquisition. It was literally all based on just making what we wanted to make and play ourselves, which is Nintendo-style games online with friends. Then, of course, I mean, everything growing quickly and whatnot. And then Facebook, well, there were a bunch of other game companies that got formed that didn't care so much about production values, cared much more about, hey, how do we juice the viral channels and juice monetization and find out, like, basically, they didn't invent UA, but from our point of view, we had never understood that this is a thing. And then ultimately ended up making the Facebook gaming environment into what it became at the time, which was an incredibly spammy, sort of fairly low production value environment, which ultimately then Facebook ended up nerfing quite a lot in terms of nerfing viral channels and whatnot in different ways, and introducing Facebook credits and all sorts of things. It was like,
man.
It was.
Forgot about all that stuff.
Yeah, no, but there was that time which was like, we felt that it was quite an interesting, actually, revelation for us, that it really took us for around a year and a half, we had grown really sort of in an unconstrained fashion. And then we started realizing that actually, you know what, we're building on top of a platform that is fundamentally going to be changing the rules in various, to us, semi-arbitrary ways, or perhaps not so strategic, or perhaps very strategic ways, but in ways that like we had no agency or control over, which to us like was pretty scary. So we were like, okay, we need to grow this company further, and if we're going to do that, we probably need to pivot onto mobile and other stuff, because we had just, you get this feeling in your stomach that like, this may not be a stable environment. Like, yes, we've had an amazing run here. Yes, we've made a lot of money. We've been very fortunate here, and we've had a lot of players, but this may not last this way. And, again, that obsession of trying to look forward and like, where's the puck going? Like, how do people play?
I remember I was working at PopCap during like kind of the height of maybe at least the height and maybe the little bit of the drop off of it, but like taking games like Bejeweled and Zuma and Peggle and trying to create Facebook games out of those games. And I remember very clearly sitting in that office going, this is not gonna last. It's not gonna be a thing that goes forever. Yeah. And it was so explosive, and then it felt like it ended almost as quickly. Yeah,
it was pretty mad overall as a time period. I think, by the way, it could have been. It was one of those examples of a platform that could have been a platform for much longer had it been curated and gardened, as a tended, if you like, as a true first-class gaming ecosystem. It could probably have been made, but it clearly wasn't a priority at the time. And by the way, we looked up to PopCap so much in terms of building game mechanics and like really delightful gameplay. So it was like one of when we were like thinking about like, who do we want to be when we grew up? Like, there were aspects of Nintendo, aspects of Pixar, aspects of PopCap, aspects of other companies. But it did. So we then thought, okay, this may not last in this way. Or at least it may not. So we better go out, raise some more money or do something. And at that moment in time, we also felt a little like a slight, callback to that time when we went public with Glo, that just this adding more money to a game company isn't necessarily making it into a better game company at the time. And then EA came knocking on our door going, hey, what, we want some of this. And so we then looked at each other and goes, what do we really want here in terms of what we're building? And we thought, hey, we tried the raising money IPO Proth last time. How about we try out this? What does it feel like to be part of a bigger company? And can we, we had this internal rallying cry of like, the reverse takeover has begun, We were such kids. It was the funniest thing. So we ultimately ended up becoming part of EA. But that was it was such a crazy journey. The company was 23 months old when EA bought us. From like, it was one of those, like, I don't think I'll ever during my career see a time when there's such a strong tailwind where you are just at the right time in the right place with the right team with a largely the right thesis on a market.
There's no way to engineer.
Not really. No. I mean, you could try to claim that you're somehow farsighted and like, yeah, we always knew. Well, we really didn't know. It was a bet. In fact, when we started, I remember when we started sharing what we are going to do, there was a whole bunch of smiling and chuckles that the Western consumer will never pay for microtransactions. Like, come on, you're making Flash games and you're expecting people to pay for pixels. Like, what kind of a business plan is that, right? And it's like, I don't know. It feels like it could be, but it's every time you set up a new company, you go after a new opportunity, or in the game market, really make a new game. It's a bet on the state of the world and a bet that there is a demand for something. And that just really worked out. I mean, it was just, it was a time and a place that I don't know it will ever be repeated quite in the same way.
It was an definitely crazy time.
Amazing time to be part of it.
So you've taken all these lessons and experiences, and now it's time to start up the deliciously named Super Evil Megacorp.
Yeah, so after Playfish became part of EA, I was actually spent a few years at EA actually as an executive vice president of digital, actually really trying to work on figuring out how EA moves on from selling boxes to actually running digital services and operating loot boxes and all that stuff. No, just joking. No, but how how the company fundamentally thinks to become a direct-to-consumer company over time. And that was sort of fun for a couple of years. I enjoyed the journey of being part of a big company at a senior level for a little bit, but it's ultimately not where my heart is. So I left. I tried to be an investor for a little bit. Helped set up an investment company called Initial Capital together with my Playfish founders at the time. And actually the first investment we ever made was to lead the seed investment round into Supercell at the time, because we knew those guys from all the way back from the Java game days. And they were just really good game makers. So we were like, hey, here, go.
That was a smart one.
We were really fortunate. I mean, it's just another one of those, like, stars happened to align, and, we literally just knew them and we knew they could make great games. And that's back when they were working on a dystopian Facebook MMO, to be clear. So that was the business plan that we invested in at the time. So things changed a little after. But I tried to be an investor. I was actually, but got very frustrated with the idea of being an investor, because you're ultimately doing relatively little. Like, you're sort of, the really important thing is to get into the right deals, somehow get invested into the right companies. But actually what you can do on the other side of the table as an investor at a board meeting is relatively little. And usually I felt that the companies that needed my help, I actually couldn't help very much. And the companies that didn't need my help, those were the cool companies,
right.
doing the cool stuff. And they were like, what are you doing here? Just go do your investor thing. Like, we've got this, So at that point in time, I had actually invested in Super Evil Megacorp. I was not a founder of Super Evil Megacorp. I was an early investor. One of the senior folks at Playfish had co-founded it at the time. So that's how I knew it. And I ended up hanging out with them because they were making this super cool game called Vainglory. And I was like, just because, remember, that obsession, which has always been with me really since the early Java game days, is like, where are devices going? Like, where's the tech going? And hence, how will people play games, in 3 to 5 to 7 years? And it felt like they were so ahead of that curve of, hey, mobiles will become more powerful over time. If you can build an engine and a game making capability that builds the kind of games that people are enjoying on PC and console, and making those for a broad range of mobile devices, there will be a market for that. Somebody's going to want that, because I want that as a player. So somebody's going to want that. And I ended up hanging out at the Super Evil offices, and at some point in time, like, literally went like, guys, I'm kind of banned by my wife from, setting up another game company, because we had 2 young kids, and, perhaps it's no longer, perhaps I don't need to get up at 2 a.m. to get a cold sweat and think everything's going to hell, perhaps I can do something a little less intense. So, but I really love what Super Evil is doing, and like, it's just a really cool game, and it's a cool company and cool founders and all of the things. So maybe I can just help out here. Like, maybe I can invent some title and come and kind of help out with this growth. I've done this company growth thing a couple of times, so maybe I can help, and I can come in, raise some money, and build a marketing department, and try to help out in whatever way I can. So I ended up joining as a COO and executive director. How's that for an imaginary title?
Wow.
Yeah. And then helped with all of those things, and lived through the launch of Vainglory. It was an incredible event it was the iPhone 6 launch, I think. We had like 2 minutes nearly on stage with Apple at that moment in time. And we were like, hey, this is the future of gaming. And that was like one of the cooler, prouder moments. again, to be able to be part of a moment that felt like, hey, here's like truly a next generation thing that's happening, and I get to be there at the start, which was really amazing. Vainglory did very well for a number of years. It was really like, hey, multiplayer core gaming is here for mobile, and here's like the beacon title for that. We did well for a number of years, and
it's a great game.
It's one of the games that, like, out of all the games that I've been part of making, it's still probably the one, even though I had relatively little to do with the actual game making, but it's still the one that I think I put altogether the most hours into as a player. Just because, I was a big League of Legends player, and that's just the rank grind is just catnip for me personally, but also just the focus on control precision. That, just the feeling of gameplay when you feel like you're completely in control, but at the same time, you have just the right amount of tactical and strategic choices as a player that you're kind of feeling that, I have mechanical skill, but I'm also outthinking the opponent as I play. Yeah, the flow. The flow. That's the word, yeah. So anyway, put lots of hours into it. That title did really well. It was really cool. It sort of grew to become the first mobile esport in some ways. Like, it had more than 100,000 simultaneous viewers on its world championships. Like, it was a thing. And going to these esports events was like intoxicating, right? It was literally intoxicating. You were like, holy shit, like this is next level. Like with Playfish, it was, all of this stuff happened online. There were millions and millions of players, but you didn't really see them in real life that much.
Right.
Some people would wear t-shirts and they were like Playfish cafes here and there, but like you didn't really see that visceral when people get into like a stadium or a thing, like everybody's shouting your game, and we were just like, whoa, this is kind of cool. And we probably got a little bit drunken on that success at the time. And probably, it was one of probably my personal bigger learning experiences actually, and probably from the fact that the companies that I'd grown previously always went up and to the right. So that is the way of game businesses. You make good games and games grow and the business becomes more valuable and you make more money all the time. Turns out it doesn't always work that way, as I found out. So Vainglory grew, I want to say about, if I remember correctly, somewhere around 3 million or so monthly actives, really like a strong player base. But we had really enormous challenges growing it beyond that. We were very early. There were not that many of these devices around. And then at one point in time, Asia, which was the strongest market for us, started having really strong local competitors in the form of Mobile Legends and Glory of Kings from Tencent and whatnot. And we were just kind of there with that title, and we didn't really have a second title in development or anything else. And then there's a moment when like everything has a curve, and when Vainglory atrophied a little bit, we found ourselves in this place where we look at each other and we go like, wait, what's the next plan now, right? And it was really a big wake-up moment for me, actually, because I felt like, hold on a second, we've like, who was in charge? Like, how did we get here? And it was quite interesting, like because everybody had been working super hard across the board. And I think what basically had happened was that we were all probably drunken on some early success of Vainglory. And then B, I think the founding team was looking to me a little bit as like the most senior company builder in the room, or most experienced one for sure. And maybe I had kind of put my head in the sand and go, well, the deal wasn't, I'm not going to get up at 2 a.m. and like cold sweat and everything's going to shit. And at the same time, clearly nobody had really. And then we found ourselves in this place where, we got to reset, we got to do something about this. And through then a whole bunch of conversations, we ultimately decided that I'm going to take on the CEO job at that moment in time, and then went through a really big reset of the company. We went from over 100 people down to like 20 something people, 26, 27, something like that. Incredibly painful, most painful things that I've done. And we couldn't even do it all at the same time. We had to do it in a certain staggered way. Could have done it much better at the time. But really, it was probably the worst feeling time in my entire career in terms of feeling like we'd let the players down because we couldn't find a way to make the title profitable and growing. Felt like we'd let the team down because we hadn't, financially managed the company in a way that allowed us to, thrive and, not do this big reset. But on the other hand, we had built amazing tech. We had built an amazing kind of capability to know and understand real-time multiplayer games on mobile. And we had a really strong set of core team that we could build on. So from then on, we then made some really big choices together. We sat in a circle as a company on the grass somewhere in Pescadero. I think we'd rented some Airbnb, and we were like, okay, we're gonna have some real talk. We're gonna really, make some big decisions here. And we decided that we are gonna make a company that's gonna make multiple games at the same time. So we will make a game based on everything we know how to do, and then we're going to, before that game comes out, start another game, and then we're going to work toward this place where we are able to. I mean, we said we're going to try to get to a place where we could kick off one game every year, which sounds ridiculous, but that's kind of a North Star. We're going to try to go in that direction as much as we can. We're going to become remote first, as we called it. Then we didn't call it fully distributed because we felt that there's no way that we can find the talent and keep the talent that we need to have in the Bay Area, in San Mateo, which is where we were. And we decided we're going to start taking orthogonal risk with our title, so that we self-publish one, but then maybe we work with a publisher, or we do something maybe with a third-party IP, do something else with our second title, and we perhaps we will try perhaps different business models and other things, and sort of earn our way back to a place where we can reliably make great games that are not just great games but commercially successful, so that we can pay our own salaries. Because for me, some of my proudest things in my career in general has been seeing that hard work and the sweat and tears of the core team working on all of these things, being able to walk away with a significant kind of personal reward from having been part of one of these adventures, for having believed in a dream at a time. And I felt great responsibility for the folks who decided to re-sign up effectively, at a time when, we had to reset the company, and we kind of asked people that, believe in this V2.0 of this company, we can do this. And, people had gone through a painful period, and we are asking them for a lot. So it was really important that we find a way to financial sustainability and obviously ultimately financial success. So that's where we started. We were dug ourselves into a hole, and there we are sitting at the bottom of that hole, and started making a game called Catalyst Black. Black. That's it. So we started thinking, okay, how do we take what we learned with Vainglory, and there's probably a book's worth of retrospectives on Vainglory and what we learned from that. How do we take all of those learnings and try to pour them into a game that is much more accessible, where we are try to correct for all the things we got wrong with Vainglory, but at the same time, while building that game, we want to build a way of making games that we can then start a second title from, and we can fork that team at some point in time in order to start doing different things.
Distributed.
Sorry. Well, we were remote first at the time. Many of us were in San Mateo still. We then made the decision later to become fully distributed, and then we haven't looked back since. But we actually turned out that once we saw that remote first is just fine, when we hired folks from LA and from Seattle and whatnot, once that became just fine, we were like, actually, you know what? It's actually easier when everyone's at home, because then there's not one office culture and one remote culture, actually, because everyone's remote, so everyone's the same. So as a result, at least we're building one operating system for the company, not multiple, right? So, but we started building Catalyst Black. We felt pretty good about it. Started building what just came out, which is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles: Splinter Fate. Game. Yeah, so that good. Came out. Yeah, and so I'm actually really, really proud of that game, because whereas Catalyst Black in some ways was the first title that we shipped as a V2.0 company, with all of the things that usually come with a first ship, we wanted to make it quickly. We wanted to kind of have it come together. It came together in many ways. I'm proud of it. It's a good game. It didn't quite hit the commercial goals that we wanted, and also there were things in the development process that we learned a lot from as developers. But I really felt that with Splintered Fate, we sort of came of age in some ways as a V2.0 company, in terms of we can ship a game that is we certainly feel more excited about bringing it to PC and console, hopefully, in the next couple of years. But a game that really came out super strong out of the gates, which is great.
It's really strong. It's really polished.
Yeah.
I've played a lot. Played my kid a lot too. It's really fun.
It's great, yeah. And even, not to undersell Catalyst Black, what Samsung Game of the Year, it was very highly reviewed in lots of different ways. It was just a tough time, I think, commercially for that title to come out in the way that it did. But so those are the two titles that are live, and then we're working on a number of other things. And I feel like we've sort of come from, we dug ourselves a hole. Now we filled up the hole. We're back on the ground. We still have it all to prove. We need to continue to ship great titles, build a great company. But, it's been a journey.
So I really want to talk to you about your philosophies and methodologies about remote and distributed. It's a huge topic in the game industry. You were clearly doing it before the pandemic. So you were probably in pretty great shape when that happened. And what was it like watching all of the whole other entire game industry kind of wrestle with something that you'd kind of already maybe been, remote and distributed. It's not a new thing, but you certainly had some type of success with it. What was it like watching the rest of the industry successfully and unsuccessfully wrestle with that?
Well, I think that time was pretty nuts in general, and I think you're right that our transition or our kind of work through that was pretty unaffected as a result. I would say though that we did not feel confident in our methodology. We were obsessed with it. We had made a strategic choice to do it. We were constantly evaluating how's this going, because we hadn't shipped. Remember, right? We hadn't shipped. So until you ship, you're nothing, right? So as a result, we were pretty paranoid, and we'd written our own handbook at the time, and we had been editing our handbook. And actually, one of the first things we did when the US went into lockdown was to just share our handbook, going, hey, here's how we do it, in case anybody else wants to, try this out. And the thing that I think what I felt sort of maybe the best about was that, hey, maybe we don't have to invent all of this thing ourselves. Maybe if other people do it too, and we can find a good way to share tips and hints and tips and tricks, and the sort of human condition right now just is one where we're all sitting at home, then maybe we'll actually have a better chance at figuring this out and getting really good at it. Because I don't, to your point, it had existed before, so it theoretically should be possible. And we were just, we were very, we were just kind of paranoid about the fact that we really want this to work really, really well, because it's literally our entire growth strategy is based on it. So we better we better be able to make it work.
Did it come about for you guys as like something that was like gnawing at you in the process that you had to fix something, or was it like, you just want to try something? Like, how did it blossom for you guys? Because I know I was working remotely and distributed before the pandemic also, at a couple startups that I had, and it just worked. It wasn't something that we said, oh, we got to do this. It just was a natural thing. And do you think a lot of game companies who haven't gone remote, or maybe are going back to the office now, do you think that's more of like something that's ingrained in the culture of game development, or is it more like, companies don't want to rock the boat and they just want to get back to business
to what
as usual?
they know? Yeah. No, so I think, we made a very deliberate strategic choice early on, but well before the pandemic, that we want to have access to talent everywhere. We cannot find the talent here, and we're not going to open up offices everywhere. So we better get good at this.
Talent first.
Talent first.
Right.
And we are going to, like any strategy comes at a cost. So we're going to take the overhead of having to write down our processes and our handbook, and having to like spend the extra 5% of time or whatever it's going to be for us to together curate our workplace, to together own this culture, this operating system of the company, if you like, to figure out how we can do things well in this environment. We had chosen to make that trade-off, and this is what it's going to be, and we were nervous about it. Can we do this? But you know what, just like anything, like you decide to make a new title, you're going to be nervous about, are we making the right title? It's a similar thing. We have made a choice here. We're nervous. Can we make this thing work? But we made a very we sort of burned the boats in the sense that we are not going back. We are hiring talent everywhere. We were initially sticking to the same time zone because we didn't want to like complicate it any further at the time. But we're just going to make this, we're going to try different things. Initially, we all worked with our cameras on, for example. That was a thing. We had constant like music playing in the background, and we had like little different ways of interacting. We were all on Discord, and then at one point in time, we were all on Discord, and then some of us hung out on Zoom together all the time. Then that, we kind of revised about, I think initially, it was literally every month that we had like a meeting of, hey, how's it going? How does this feel? Is it good? Bad? Are you able to do your stuff and whatnot? We made it, I think, a real core tenet of figuring out our culture here was to make it a crowdsourced culture internally, where we would literally be obsessed with having meetings every week where we talk about how is it going? Is this rule set or this process, this culture that we're coming up with, is it working for you? And is it working for us? And how would you change it? And what do you want to do different? And we sort of through trial and error found a place which was quite stable. Like initially we made sweeping changes, cameras on, cameras off, Discord, then Zoom and Discord, and then whatnot. And now we've ended up at a place where we still, about every 6 months or so, we have a meeting to look at, hey, how's our handbook, how's our operating procedures, like how does this, is it working for us or not? But they're relatively minor edits. And a lot of the time it's actually reductions. Like, so it's a thing that we used to think was
don't
really
need to do
important.
that anymore.
Yeah, we don't need to do that anymore because, you know, it's just working because we found our way around it. So
like background music in stand-ups.
We do that.
I saw that. It came up in the research.
That's the thing.
I've done that before. It's just so the right way.
Yeah.
It's so cool.
And the thing is, though, that all of this carries an overhead. It's not going to happen itself. You have to designate a person that does this. It's this person's responsibility to put on the music 2 minutes before. And then when everybody gets into the meeting, says, good morning, this day in history, this thing happened and that thing happened and, and whatnot. And this is the month of cheese and the month of cranberries or whatever, And just like, to set the tone a little bit. And then leave the music on while you do this other stuff. But the thing is, like, you have to curate it. It's like there's an investment required. But it also creates certain cultural idiosyncrasies that I really believe in because it is us. Like, that is how our company runs. And it creates a pretty clear sense of identity and a pretty clear sense of, again, like of an operating system, if you like, for the company, that this is people, it's easier to know what to expect because of certain routines work in certain ways.
I have a synthesizer on my desk, and I usually try to start out the meetings with just random noodling to set the vibe. So I totally get that, but it's a great way to kind of get everyone in the mood and have it not be so serious because we are making video games.
Yeah, it's true. And I think actually part of all of these things also originated during the pandemic because we also were very honest about the fact that we all feel pretty anxious, like about just the state of the world and the state of all of this. And so we tried to bring in as much silliness into our meetings as we could. There was a point where there was like this moment when the meeting was going to start where because we used to have in the office this big gong where we like, for our stand-ups, we rang the gong but we didn't have the gong anymore. So like, what are we going to do now? So we had this rotating thing in alphabetical order of like, you had to come up with your way of doing the gong that day exactly on time. And somebody, would find a trumpet and he'd blow something on the trumpet. Somebody else would find some other ridiculous noise-making instrument or whatever. Somebody would, play the synthesizer or whatever. But it's sort of, we try to find like ways of expressing ourselves and ways of just lightening the mood in different ways.
Yeah.
And I think, and that
it's critical.
Much of that has stuck. Yeah.
It's so critical because even though there are life and death situations that can happen, life and death in the company and product sense anyway. But having your team be together and feel good and to be able to laugh at that stuff, like even in the face of the impossible.
Yeah.
That's what helps you get.
I think it's especially in the face of the impossible.
Yeah.
And I think there's something about the positivity and the psychological safety of, we're like we're whatever band of pirates, we're a set of folks who are genuinely trying to do this. And the odds are, it's difficult. These things are difficult. Yes, it's the world's, who knows where the world's going to, but at least we're going to have fun while we're doing this.
Completely. Yeah. If you lose sight of that, then that's where you get that, like those 1,000-yard stare projects and people just like kind of mentally checking out. And
that's it. I think we have done an okay job at constantly evolving in this regard, though. I think the minute that you think you've figured this out in terms of remote work, I think that's when it gets dangerous. So I am still, we're now north of 100 people. So obviously our processes have evolved also too, because we can't do stand-ups with everybody all the time as a result. So we still have 3 all company meetings a week, and we try to make them very, very efficient and minimal time consumption, as fun as possible. But I am really, like, one of the things I'm obsessed with is culture, and how do we help constantly evolve how we work, and how do we like instrument, if you like, how we work. We make games and we want to understand how players play the games and how we make them better. Like I'm obsessed with trying to work out how to instrument the company in such a way that I understand where are we doing well and where aren't we? Like, where is the employee experience at Super Evil? Like, where is it good and where isn't it good, and how can we make it better? So
a lot of that came up in the research. It's very clear that that's important to you.
Yeah, it's sort of our if you like, mission as a company is to create the very best shared gaming moments, just because we all love multiplayer gaming moments in general. We think the world should have more of them. There's a loneliness epidemic around the world. Like, people should play more today.
And
that's what we want to do.
That's come up a lot at this DICE.
It has, right? It's pretty interesting, actually.
And
so,
and like, haven't really heard a lot about it. You hear a lot about it, but like, it's really been, people are talking about it this week.
Yeah.
you know?
It is, yeah. I think it's interesting from our point of view. Like those are the gaming moments we want to build, but from a vision point of view, in terms of the kind of company we want to build, like we want to build the very best home for the best talent in the industry that want to work in a distributed game company. So it's a really clear marching order, right? I mean, it's like,
yeah,
if we want to be the best home, we better build the best home, right? So, and that means trying to constantly evaluate the experience that people are having and try to react to it and try to work out how do we improve? How do we constantly have this process in place where we gather experiences and gather data and try to understand how can we get better in the areas where we are weak, and how can we keep the areas where we're strong, and how can we perpetuate a culture? And it's hard. Like, perpetuating any culture when you're growing fast is difficult, even in an office setting, and in a remote setting, it's just extra difficult. And that's why I'm obsessed with it.
Yeah, but if you want to have those moments of connection, have people have moments of connection in games, you have to have that vibe at work too.
Well, yeah, you would think, right?
Yeah,
I mean, so the good news, when we all do play a bunch of games together, like, I mean, both we play the games that we make, but we also play other games together, right? And I think that games as a form of togetherness is important to us as human beings as well as to us as game makers.
Yeah, I've had some of the best experiences in my career have been working at smaller companies, focused on multiplayer games where we're all playing the game together, and it is, those two things just roll over each other and it comes out in the game, and then the amazing stuff that happens in the game feeds the culture of the team and the studio and the company. It's pretty remarkable when that happens, and it's addicting also. And you know, if you have had those experiences and you go to another situation where you might not have those, it's hard to look back on those good situations where those things happen organically.
Yeah, and it's true. And I've sort of have the belief for a long time that game making is collective art, and there's no way that you can, like, an art is an expression of like your state of mind in lots of different ways, and there's no way that you can collectively come up with a great experience for players if you're not somehow having a great experience while making it, right? There has to be some reflection of it somehow, and that's why I feel like it's in a physical office setting, you can judge the vibe of what's happening, like just by walking around a little bit, you can see, like, are people looking happy, or are we down for whatever reason? Do we need to, like, do something? In a distributed company, on the other hand, it's much harder. So we try to construct all of these sort of mechanisms of connection between people, but also between, like, where various anonymous feedback and question asking channels and also instrumentation around, like, how people are feeling and net promoter scores and all sorts of things, in order to try to figure out, like, how are we feeling at any one time, and to make sure that we're kind of keeping up our spirits, if that makes sense.
I have a note here, taking advantage of virtual tools to fill in the gaps.
Yeah.
Right. So what are the things that you guys do specifically to kind of measure and support, how is the team health?
Yeah. So there are many different pulse survey tools that, sometimes I kind of run by HR departments at big companies that, feel like they're a chore sometimes. We use one called Office Vibe. I use it. It's like my main tool of understanding how we're doing. And I always, like, we do again, about every 6 months, we do a bigger company review where we're like, because we get Office Vibe is an ongoing tool. So every 2 weeks is a pulse survey, and they ask various questions based on various things, and it scores the company on, like, how we're doing in various departments across various teams and whatnot. It's all anonymous unless people want to put their name on a piece of comment and whatnot. We respond to everything, literally every single message that anybody writes on Office Vibe anonymously. Either I will respond, or one of the senior management will respond, and we will all see it when we have a meeting, a kind of management meeting every 2 weeks. It's one of the perma agenda items, like what's been coming back from Office Vibe in the last couple of weeks, how we're doing on scores, how we're doing on feedback, like where are the pain points. So that's one way in which we use it. The other way is every 6 months, we do a bigger company review where I tell everyone, listen, I'm going to share all the results from Office Vibe, like in 2 weeks' time. Please fill your surveys. Normally you get maybe 50-60% in any particular 2 weeks, right, of people to actually do it. And, you kind of nag, and then you get a little bit more, and then you don't nag and you get a bit less. But then I say like, look, we really want participation like north of 90% or whatever, just so it's really, really representative so we can look at this together. And then we literally look at all the scores and results together as a company, all of us. And we look, we're scoring well with Trust with Manager. That's good. Maybe we haven't recently, maybe the EU time zone has reported lower happiness scores than the North America time zone, for example. That's bad. Like, I mean, we want to be a great home for everyone, everywhere. What does that mean? Maybe we aren't doing so well on time zone related things. What do we think? What shall we do? Right. So that like, I think one of the secrets, very, very deeply kept secrets, but one of the important parts, I think, of culture building is to make it a shared effort. And if you can share the scores of this sort of thing and not sort of have it like the HR department ingests everything and then decides how to improve morale. Yeah. Instead, share the scores and make it a shared discussion of, hey, how can we can do breakout groups and discuss what's going on with time zones and how could we come up with some initiatives to fix it. And then we can see 6 months later or 3 months later or whatever we want, look back and see, hey, did that work? And was that good? So that's been one important tool. There's also a lot of other things we do, like we do a kudos board once a month where we do like a 1 hour meeting of people just are able to write a little sticky note that expresses kudos and thanks to somebody in the company. And it's an entirely sort of peer-to-peer sort of process, but we're all there. It's like a town hall. We play some music, we allow people to celebrate each other's work and express gratitude for what they're doing. And it's become, and we always have one of the artists, it's kind of coloring in all the various things. It's become quite a soulful sort of beat for us.
That sounds cool.
Yeah, and it's one of those, like, it's really nice and it's also a way to celebrate work that goes unseen sometimes, because you don't always see all the amazing stuff that everybody's working on. And it's a really great reminder for me. It's one of my favorite moments in the month, because just hearing all the really cool stuff that's happened, not through the kind of words of some team leader, but actually a peer that points out somebody else doing amazing work. It's really cool.
So how does all that positive culture work and process translate to new hires and like people looking, I might want to join this company because I know processes like that, if they're if they're publicly stated, that's a huge positive drawing point for people. I'm sure you get people wanting to work at your company because of those efforts, plus the remote and distributed nature. Like, how does that all play together when you're building, the perfect team?
Well, I mean, hardly perfect. We're just trying to be ever better, right? We want to strive toward the North Star of being the best home, which means that we just need to improve every day. What we've tried to do is we always feel like if we find a way to just kind of share our stories as developers and how we kind of find our everyday life, it's helpful. So we try to, whether it's do little posts or little pictures or welcoming our new joiners or sharing little tidbits about either how we work or what we do, that we can hopefully reflect externally a little bit of who we are inside. And we try to do things like making our handbook is public, and when we make a revision publicly, because if it's on the web, it must be real, right?
Yeah.
So,
right.
but it's also like we as a leadership team just take like full ownership of this stuff, and we try to do our very best to reflect our values and who we are externally. Not always easy though. I mean, there's so much content out there that trying to reflect your values and what it is that you do to new joiners or to prospective new joiners is actually not the easiest thing always. I think we are getting better at it, and also these days we do try to get large parts of the company at least together physically every 6 months. In fact, next week we have a big get together in London for folks in Europe and some senior folks in the US, and then we're hoping to do the same in reverse in the US around March time. And we try in these moments of togetherness also to like celebrate the fact that, hey, physical connection is also a thing.
Yep.
And try to take as many pictures and share them and so on. But I would say that figuring out how to reflect like truly our values, not just through the products that we make, but also through like our external communication and everything else, is still something very much work in progress from our point of view. But still, like my main focus is always how we perceived internally. Because if we can create an internal perception of ourselves and an internal employee experience, if you like, that is good and improving at all times, where people feel agency and where we build this thing together. Because it's like one of the cool things when you get to build a company is you get to build the company you want to work for, right? I mean, that's like one of the privileges of it.
Yeah.
And if we can do that together and do a good job at that, then in some ways they will come, if that makes sense. I very much believe in that in game making as well, that if you can create a great experience, even if it is for a subgroup of your core players, then it is much, much easier to grow from there than it is to kind of try to be everything to everyone.
Yeah. I mean, I totally agree with everything you just said. Like, it's so much different from the kind of, let's do a postmortem in 2 weeks after we finish the game that we've been working on for 2.5 years. And then those things are never fun, and they're hardly ever positive.
Yeah.
Right. And if you're not checking in like regularly, you're going to have a lot of like built up resentments because the project it got extended, or we didn't have the support we needed. And those things turn into a gripe session, not really about like, how can we be better and how can we make a game better next time?
But it's a good point though, because we do a lot of retrospectives and we try to learn a lot across the board. And what we found is that the important that we actually bring external moderators in for our retrospectives, because we just feel it's more credible this way. Like we actually, I've
never heard of a company in the games doing that before.
I highly recommend it. Because that way it's also like we show to ourselves that this is serious, like this is important. We need to learn from this. And then we go out of our way to ensure that we communicate ourselves what the key takeaways were and how that got reflected, or how that gets reflected in the next project, or whatever it is. That you can't fix everything, but if you can fix some things every time, then we will constantly get a little bit better. So that over communicating of not just the retrospective itself, but the kind of outcomes of the retrospective has been something that we've tried to put a lot of thought into.
That's very cool. I wanted to talk a little bit about your passion for climate change and your efforts in outside of games and also hopefully in games. I read an article and watched some video of, you're publicly calling on game companies to get involved in climate change. If you're doing well when the world isn't doing well, it's on you to help out. I completely agree with what you're saying here. I'm often asking and wondering why games and game companies aren't putting efforts into this. Seems like you're the only one talking about it. How are you, how are you approaching this with other game companies? Has you being public about this got people talking to you about it? I'm sure everyone listening wants to hear about that, because it's obviously a huge problem, and we are fortunate in games to make a lot of money. And, the entertainment we're providing for everyone is helping everyone get through their day, but there needs to be more days. There
needs to be more days. I really agree with that. Yeah. With the decent climate. Yeah. So climate change is an important subject to me. It was when I think it was the year I turned 40, which is already too many years ago at this point in time. But where I was thinking, like, it really kind of hit me that, maybe I should find some systemic way of every year thinking about doing something that perhaps gives a bit back one way or the other. I've been very fortunate in many ways. And I'm particularly interested in big systemic causes, big sort of existential or semi-existential issues for humanity, and how we can reduce some of the risk in those areas. And it became, I felt particularly stark when the pandemic hit, where you literally have game revenues going through the roof at a time that the planet's having a particularly bad time, or humanity's having a particularly bad time. Of course, through the pandemic, but also through what seemed like climate change that actually isn't being perhaps addressed as quickly and as much as it should be. So that summer, I decided to devote a bunch of time to looking at how can I best help while still running a game company. And I felt at the time that ensuring, like, if you look at the root of where do carbon emissions come from, and in particular during that time, it was a time when a lot of major policy decisions were about to be made in the US and also shortly in India and other places. Like the biggest single leverage point for climate change at the time wasn't, it changes all the time, but at the time was very much influencing key policy decisions in the US, in EU, in India, and in other places. So that summer, decided to get together with a couple of other game company founders who had benefited from growth in games over time to put together a matching donation campaign where we were hoping to raise $1 million at the time for climate change.
Which you did.
Which we raised 1.4 million, actually, something like this, which is really cool. Very, very grateful for everyone who contributed. But the important thing there was that A, we can do this, we should do this. And B, it's really important to research causes to try to work out like how for climate change, like, of course, as a game industry, we should endeavor to become carbon negative. We are not a very carbon footprint heavy anyway industry. And it's sort of a thing that we simply should do. And there's a bunch of initiatives actually ongoing that I'm hopefully contributing to in different ways there. There are other game companies doing good things. Supercell is doing things. Space Ape Games are doing things. Many others are too. And I think we need more of a joint voice to talk about some of these things. And I also think that that it's not enough to just reduce carbon emissions and become carbon negative. I actually think for the future of humanity, it's also important to make sure that we research solar radiation management and research these kind of, if you like, temporary interventions in how much sunlight actually reaches the Earth. And there are, whether that's through somehow brightening marine clouds or whether it's through small particles in the upper atmosphere or whatnot, which kind of just could buy us time. Because I think one of the things that game making really teaches you over time is that most things that can go wrong do go wrong, and most forecasts are wrong, no matter what, no matter how scientific you think.
Anyway.
Exactly. And no matter how scientific you believe your model is for how your game is going to evolve or, how many players are going to every it's
or
almost
even
always
if you actually make the game you started out making.
Quite. Like anyway, so like the world is chaotic this way, right?
Yeah.
And every forecast model is just an estimation. So when we say climate change, 2 degrees increase to 1.5 degrees, that is really just a probability spectrum of could be 2 degrees at some reasonable likelihood, and at a slightly less likelihood could be 3 degrees. But there's like these tail end scenarios of 5% or 10% of scenarios that could actually be much more than that. And making sure that A, we cut carbon as quickly as possible, and then B, that we have some science, if you like, some basic tools at our disposal that should the atmosphere warm much faster than we think it's going to, then rather than not having tools available to block sunlight or some percentage of sunlight from reaching the Earth, that we would at least research some of it and have perhaps some of those tools available. And they are clearly a kind of worms. Like no one in their right mind wants to go and interfere with the upper atmosphere or interfere with how much sunlight reaches the Earth. But there may be a time when that's the least bad option. So I think like having an open mind about at least developing the basic science around this stuff is important. So that's why folks contributing to this and us as a game industry, I think A, we need to cut our own emissions, right? Get rid of those. B, I think we need to also consider that those of us who are philanthropically active in this area also maybe help educate the world that this is a probabilistic future model, and that those of us who worry about downsides and plan Bs and plan Cs, maybe it's good to advocate for a plan B and a plan C here too.
I mean, is there a group that's kind of doing this that you're involved with that,
I would say there's informally, a lot of folks in games care intensely about climate.
Yeah.
So there are various initiatives behind the scenes that I'm hoping, I think, become probably public sometime soonish in this area, and I'm hoping to be involved in some of those. And
cool.
And I think, and hopefully it's translating from just individual companies doing individual things to hopefully companies doing things together.
It would be great to have companies founded with that part of their foundation, like, Tom's Footwear is an example.
Yeah.
Right. It would be great to have some game companies that's part of their starting goal. Or maybe we can get like VCs to make, you have to do X amount, for climate change, or you can't have the money.
Yeah, and I think these are good thoughts. I think the thing that's being complicated with games, I think with also some other industries, is but just how do you account for carbon? Like, how do you work out where all the power consumption is, right? And how much is it really like? And also then, okay, so if we emit X, tons of carbon a year, then how do we truly offset that in a way that is measurable, verifiable, accurate, and ultimately carbon negative? So I think there are certain steps, and I think some of the initiatives going on behind the scenes is trying to find like a standardized way to look at this, so that you can sort of make a verifiable claim, if that makes sense, in terms of truly what do you need to do to be carbon negative. Because I do think that as an industry, A, we're fortunate that our emissions aren't that high, so this shouldn't be a very hard thing to do. And B, most folks I know have their heart in the right place on this, and they really do want to contribute.
Well, I think that's amazing that you're doing it, and I hope more people get involved. This was a super fun conversation, really interesting. I really love talking to you. We didn't get to talk really about Rebel Moon or Netflix. You probably can't talk too much about it anyway, but if you don't know, Super Evil Megacorp is making a game based on the epic 2-part space opera by Zack Snyder, coming out on Netflix this year. The movie this year.
I don't actually know if they announced the timing of the movie yet. It's soon.
I saw it December, but it could be next year.
Yeah, it may be. We are super psyched about that. We are very excited about that collaboration. It's a big project for us, and yeah, we're excited about it. We're, in addition to that, also working on a big unannounced AAA console, PC, every possible platform under the sun game, coming out much later this decade, that we are also excited about. A lot of things going on. We try our just very best to try to hopefully build really great games and hopefully build a really good company in the process.
Well, it seems like you're on the right path, and hopefully we can do another one of these next year and talk about all that other stuff that we didn't get to today.
Sounds great. I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, man.
Cheers.